I'm Heather Stewart with Women's Shelters Canada. I'm the Knowledge Exchange Coordinator, and we're an organization that represents women's shelters and transition houses across Canada. We serve as a liaison between all the different provincial associations and territorial organizations. And we were actually created by the territorial and provincial organizations to sort of serve as that connecting organization at the federal level. We do a lot of liaison with the federal government on different policies and strategies that they're working on at that level, and we bring the results and opportunities for advocacy back to women's shelters. We also do a lot of knowledge sharing and research to try to create a clearer picture of what this is, the state of women's shelters, what are the needs, where are the gaps, and where are the opportunities for change and improving the situation for women and children in violence, in situations of abuse for the future. Yeah, we run a program called sheltersafe.ca, which is a website that hopefully most of you have heard of, that lists the women's shelters across Canada, and we're about to do an update that will include their whether or not they offer any pet programs. So that's something that'll be a really good enhancement to that service in the next year. So I'm going to start our next poll. I think we're pretty close to full response on that one, except for the people that have just joined. So I'm going to switch to the second little poll. We're 94% first and second stage VAW shelters. We're 3% other nonprofit organizations, and we've actually got 3% animal welfare organizations that have joined too. So that's wonderful. Welcome to all of you. So the second, I'm going to close that first poll, and oops. And then I'm going to open the next one, which is just to sort of give a sense of where people are at in terms of their, if they're with a VAW shelter or transition house, which is most of you, what stage are you at in terms of planning? Are you just thinking about it? Are you starting to make a plan? Are you delivering your plan but still in pre-delivery phase? Or are you very, very freshly starting delivering service for less than the past 2 years, or have you been doing this for a number of years now? Oh, great, great. So most of you are still in the pre-planning and consideration. More than half, about 60% or more, are still just sort of thinking about what's possible for us. That's great. And it looks like about 17% have made the decision that it's something you want to do, but you're still casting around and brainstorming for ideas. 12% have developed a plan and are in the process of executing it, and we've got 4% and 8% respectively who have just started delivering or who have been delivering for a while. So welcome to all of you. I'm really excited to have all these different stages of interest and commitment to pet programs here with us today, and I think we'll all be able to learn from each other, but particularly we are here to learn from Rochelle and from Jackie. So I'm very, very excited to be introducing them both. So actually, I don't have Rochelle's long academic organization title in front of me right now, so I'm gonna let Rochelle introduce herself. Actually, I think you'll be able to get the title proper, which is very important.
Sure. All right. So yeah. So I'm not. So Heather, are we going to switch to my presenter view, or am I getting started? Or
just introduce yourself, and then I'll close the poll, and we'll switch over to your window.
Okay. I'm Rochelle Stevenson. I am the project coordinator of the Animal and Interpersonal Abuse Research Group at the University of Windsor. So we're a collection of academics, and we really look at this intersection primarily between violence against women and animal maltreatment. So I'll be talking a little bit about some of our research today.
Excellent. So I'm going to switch. Oh, it looks like you are already the presenter, so go ahead. You're ready to go.
All right, great. So I'm going to share my screen.
I already see it up, so.
Oh, do you? Okay, great.
Yeah, so I think you're ready to go.
Wonderful. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for being here. And so one of the things that we're really talking about today is pets and mental health in women's shelters and transition houses. And what I'm going to be talking about is just what the research says about that and kind of some of the impacts that we've found through research that we've done. So I'm going to start off just quickly with talking about the human-animal relationship. So animals are in Canadian homes. The vast majority of Canadian homes have a pet in their home. And this number actually increases to 3/4 of homes with families with children have at least one pet. So recognizing the clientele that you're serving, chances are you have women with animals that are coming through your door that are looking for service. And also 80% of pet owners would describe their pets as members of the family. So recognizing that this is a very close bond. And that this bond tends to be even stronger among those who have histories of abuse or trauma. So when it comes to benefits of this relationship, really what we focus on kind of in this context is the emotional and psychological benefits. So we see things like reduced anxiety and stress related to kind of having a companion animal in your life. And we can see evidence of this through things like the therapy dog program and TheraPet therapeutic visitation, so recognizing the benefits of that relationship. What we also see from the research is that people report reduced loneliness and isolation. And this is especially important when we think about the tactics that abusers use in terms of isolating the woman from their support networks, from family, from friends. And so the relationship with the companion animal might actually be the last positive relationship that is available in the woman's life. So recognizing the import of that attachment. And what we also see from research is that there tends to be an increased ability to handle difficult situations and trauma because the relationship with the animal provides that stable foundation and that supportive relationship with which to handle some of those more difficult situations. And that certainly applies to the women that you see coming through your doors looking for service. What's really important, I think, in terms of mental health for the women who you're serving is that the relationship with this animal, the positive relationship, might mediate the traumatic impact of abuse. And what research says, and what people who are reporting things like sexual assault and sexual abuse, is that the support, the companionship, and the unconditional love received in the relationship with their animal is incredibly important with moving forward through that trauma and healing. So, given what we know about the strength of the human-animal relationship, and we're thinking about pet loss, the loss of the animal tends to be rated as about consistent with the loss of a human loved one. So this can happen in two different ways. One, through the death of an animal. Certainly we see this in things like old age or euthanasia, but what we also know is that this grief is intensified when the death of the animal is as a result of trauma or accident. So when we think about pet abuse in the hands of a partner, recognizing that that actually compounds the grief experienced by the woman. And loss can also happen with having to leave a pet behind in a relationship, right? Having to leave a pet behind with an abuser complicates that grief at the severing of that relationship. So when we really think about the complicated trauma that clients often come into shelters with, the grief related to leaving a pet in a dangerous situation really adds to this. So in addition to the grief at the loss, what we have is guilt at abandoning their companion animal, self-blame about whether they did the right thing, doubt about the correctness of other actions, a lot of worry about what's going on in the home when they can't be there to protect their animal, some fear, and certainly some anger. So really, the abuse received at the hands of their partner kind of compounds the grief at the loss of the animal, and we know that that can result in things like depression, PTSD, and the grief also compounds kind of the ability to cope with trauma. So statements like, "it was only a dog, think about your children," or "you can get another one," are examples of way that this grief related to the loss of the animal is minimized and can further result in the isolation of the woman. Sorry, my hair is falling in my face. This also undermines the very real emotions of the client, and this really impedes healing. So to this end, social work and counseling journals have really issued calls to practitioners to take pet loss seriously to address kind of this idea of disenfranchised grief, which is grief that's not socially recognized or grief that's really minimized. Um, and kind of recognizing that acknowledging this validates the grief of the clients and recognizes the importance of the relationship between the woman and her animal, and really helps the client in healing and supports her in her mental health. So kind of looking at this intersection between intimate partner abuse and animal abuse, really what we're talking about is this, the fact that in a violent family, everyone can be a victim. So threats and harm to pets are really more likely in relationships where there's intimate partner violence, which is a very consistent finding out of the literature, as well as the fact that concern for pets really does impact help-seeking behaviors on the part of the women, and many women will delay leaving their abusive relationships out of concern for their companion animals. And what's important to note at this point is that most women do not report the time delay in days. They will report them in weeks or months. So this really does represent a huge risk factor for the women and the animals in the relationship. So just kind of jumping forward a little bit to what we found at APARC through our Canadian surveys. So we developed the surveys through focus groups with women in the shelters and staff members. And so there's two separate surveys, one for staff, one for clients. And we had pretty good response rates based on 16 shelters, so 86 clients and 100 staff members responding. So what we did find in terms of the intersections of abuse is that women who report animal abuse or animal maltreatment were at a significantly greater risk of more frequent and severe physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. That the threats, the emotional abuse of the animals, and neglect were perceived by the survivors as being intentional on the part of the abuser and motivated by a desire of the abuser to upset them and control them. Overall, what we found was actually a much higher proportion in our sample than some of the other research, but 89% of clients with pets reported some form of animal maltreatment. That's 9 out of 10 women walking through the doors of a shelter that have experienced animal maltreatment, recognizing things like grief, anger, self-blame, self-doubt are all kind of components of dealing with that. So this is just a really quick list of some of the more common animal maltreatments that were reported by some of our clients. So threats to get rid of the pet, so the threats to sever that relationship were reported by 65% of women. Things like intimidation or scaring of the animals, throwing objects, threatening to harm an animal, refusing to feed a pet, kicking a pet, killing a pet, were all common behaviors. And these behaviors on the part of the abuser, to say nothing of the harm to the animals, really undermine the mental health and emotional well-being of the women. And we argue are as a component of the psychological abuse of the woman as well. So when it comes to help seeking, what we did find was that emotional abuse of the animal, threats, neglect, and the physical animal abuse really did increase the woman's desire to leave the relationship. And that 56%, so over half, delayed leaving out of concern for their pet's safety. So, and what we also found was that 47%, so almost half, would have left earlier if they could have brought their pet to shelter with them. Interestingly, almost half of them were not advised of pet services by staff. And a quarter of women were advised by pet services by staff, but only after they got to the shelter, so the pets were left in that dangerous situation. And when it came to where pets were left, 60% of women had to leave their pet with their abuser. And this is also really important because almost a third of them continued returning to their abuser because he had their animals. So this represents a really dangerous situation, and it represents a continued ability for the abuser to emotionally and psychologically abuse the woman through threats. So what can we really do to support women? I feel like I'm speeding through this, but that's okay. We can ask women about companion animals when they call for service, on intake, during safety planning, during risk assessments. Even though in the staff survey, 3/4 of staff members were aware of women in the community who didn't access shelters because they couldn't bring their pets, very rarely were questions being asked. In fact, most of the staff members reported that questions about animals were never asked of the women. So this represents kind of one of those policy implications that can be really clear, in both in terms of figuring out what the needs of the women are, but also in acknowledging the importance of the relationship with the animals. So asking about pets when women call, do you have a pet? Are you worried about their safety? tells the woman that we understand that this is an important relationship to you. So the other kind of things is things like addressing grief and other emotions related to pet loss and counseling, whether that is loss related to trauma or death of the animal, or loss related to the severing of that relationship because they couldn't bring their pet with them. And the final thing would be implement a safe pet program. And really, this is just a program or service that enables both women, children, and the animals in the home to get out of the abusive situation safely. And so when it comes to things like what do safe pet programs look like, there's a number of different options, and it really just depends on what your needs are. So things like referral to a community agency. I know in Ottawa there's the Safe Pet Network. In here in Windsor there's the Purple Leash campaign, who help women leaving domestic violence to find safe haven for their animals as well. But this could also be things like a local animal rescue organization. Boarding at a local animal shelter, contact the SPCA and see what options there are available there. Boarding with local businesses, this could be a veterinarian, a dog kennel, depending on if you're in rural Canada, maybe even just a horse farm or something like that. Foster care, there could be a couple of dedicated volunteers with your agency that would be willing to foster a couple of animals. But really at APARC, what we feel is the best option to really support women and their animals, keeping that relationship intact and recognizing the positive impact of the human-animal relationship for mental health is co-sheltering pets at the domestic violence shelter. And Jackie's going to speak more to the practical implications, like and some of the challenges and all the benefits of doing this after. So, but like overall, what do we need to implement a safe pet program? So there has to be a knowledge of the level of need in the community. So recognize what the need is, and to do that, we need to ask questions. So when women call for service, do you have an animal? Are you concerned about their safety? It could be that the answer is no, or it could be the answer is, oh my God, yes, please help me. Keeping track of that answer gives you a much better knowledge of the level of need in the community, and the program that you implement might be based on whether you have 2 calls for service for animals a year or 2 calls for service for animals a week, right? So recognizing what that need is. With that is knowledge of the community resources available. So are there veterinarians in your community that are willing to provide low cost or free healthcare? Are there pet stores that are willing to help you out with things like dog food or kitty litter? Recognizing that there are resources available, it's just a matter of building that network. And also communication among agency staff members. Recognizing that people do have really lovely, creative problem solving that happens in that moment when a woman calls and says, I need help, and I need help for my animal as well. There's a lot of impromptu, really creative problem solving that can happen, and communicating what those are among staff members, recognizing that there is a toolbox of things that each agency has, can really start that process of implementing a safe pet program. So where we are kind of at APARC, and I really love this kind of graphic, is no one should have to choose between leaving an abusive situation and ensuring their pet's safety. The human-animal relationship is very important, and it gets increasingly important as women are dealing with abuse and what it might be the last positive relationship in their life with the unconditional love and support. So this is kind of I think our key takeaway at APARC that we'd like to communicate. When it comes to things like how you actually do this in your community, it sounds like there's a lot of people listening who are really thinking about this and how to put this in place. Here's 2 resources, and I know that Heather is sending out these slides. So you have these. These are 2 free how-to guides, and they're quite good about dealing with some of those possible barriers and challenges, as well as things like forms and all of those tips and tricks that you need to think about. And that's it for me. That's it for my presentation. Thank you very much. That's my contact information, and feel free to contact me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rochelle. And that was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. We're going to have some time for questions at the end, but I'd like to just maybe I'll open us up to maybe 2 questions from the listeners right now, just in case there's something that's an urgent question right now. So for those who are participating, we're not going to turn the mics on because there are 42 of us here right now. But there's a place on your sidebar or your control panel for questions that you can type in, and I will see them, and then I'll be able to pass them on verbally and to Rochelle and to Jackie at the end. If you have a question for Rochelle that doesn't get answered right now, that we'll be able to sort of ask Rochelle or Jackie questions at the end. But I wanted to open that up right now. And I have a question. I just wanted to ask for a little bit more context around that research that you were sharing. I know that that's very, very new. It's something that didn't exist in Canada until very recently. Can you tell us a little bit about APARG and these research projects you did and how groundbreaking they really are in Canada?
Well, certainly. Basically, this was a study that we started about, I guess, 2013, developing those surveys. What I did was I traveled across the country. We went to 8 different shelters, pilot testing these surveys and revising them both with staff members and clients. And one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was capturing the women's experience and the staff experience, recognizing that there's a lot of ad hoc kind of on the ground solutions that are happening on a one-off basis, but recognizing that the information across Canada about the presence, prevalence, and style of safe pet programs is really lacking. We do have some research from the US, a little bit from the UK and Australia about this, but we don't have anything in regards to what's going on in the Canadian shelter system. So that's where this was really groundbreaking. This was the first Canadian survey to be looking at this issue, and this was just the first stage. Really what we're doing is we're looking at revising some of those surveys in regards to kind of just fine-tuning them and rolling them out across Canada so that every shelter will be responding so we can get a much better comprehensive picture of what's going on in every province and territory.
That's wonderful. Yeah. It's very, very exciting, and hopefully if there's anything that we can do at Women's Shelters Canada to help build those connections, and hopefully everyone listening will now have APARG on their radar, and if you send them a survey, they'll be like, yes, we definitely want to help, because this is really, really helping to build that base of knowledge that's necessary to move forward on this issue in Canada. So I don't actually see any written questions. Hopefully everyone sees the area where they would put in their questions, but we'll definitely have time for questions at the end. That's normally when we do the questions and answer time. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone to Jackie McKinnon. Jackie McKinnon is the director of Bethesda House in Bowmanville, Ontario, if I got that right. She offers a range of pet programs, and I'm very, very excited to hear the story that she's going to share about Bethesda House's experience and what they've gained from it. So I'm just making Jackie the presenter now, and she should have the opportunity to share her screen in a second.
Should I click?
Yeah, you have to click your site, and there it is. So I don't see your I see your desktop, but not your presentation yet. But, so just click that.
Okay.
Once you bring up the slideshow, then it'll and make it full screen. Then that's what everyone will see. I see it now. I see it now. Yeah. So
slideshow. I'm assuming.
Okay, you just need to make it full screen now.
Yes, I'm trying. Let me just see.
That'll do it. There you are. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Okay. Would you like me to go ahead?
Yeah, if you could give yourself a quick introduction to and a little bit about Bethesda House, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Well, as you've said, I'm Jackie McKinnon. I've been the executive director at Bethesda House for almost 15 years now. And in listening to Rochelle's presentation, my head just kept nodding up and down, because so much of what she presented we've experienced. So I'd like to just go ahead and tell you a bit about Bethesda House itself. For example, our buildings. We're funded.
Jackie, just a technical note. Your papers, I think, are a little bit close to your microphone. So if you could clear them, we'd have a better audio. Perfect. That sounds much better. Carry on.
Better? Okay.
Yes, that sounds great.
Wonderful. Our building, we're actually funded as an 18-bed shelter. It's an old century home, renovated about 15 years ago. It has a top, middle, and basement floor, 3 levels, large bedrooms, and it's got a large industrial stairwell down one side and then elevator. And our outreach building is about a block from us. And I'm just giving you that physical description to give it a little bit of a setup for, so you can picture animals in a building like that. The geographic location is Bowmanville, Ontario, just east of Toronto. We're a very large region. Bowmanville is in the more rural outreach of it, but we are within a half-hour drive of Queen Sister shelters in Durham region, and about an hour drive from two additional shelters, Lindsay, Peterborough, and Coburg. So we've got lots of sister shelter support. Durham region, unfortunately, has one of the highest rates of domestic violence in Ontario. Our Durham Regional Police respond to about an average of 21 domestic related calls a day. So we know how many calls aren't being reported. 3 women were murdered in our region just so far in 2017 by their intimate partners. And our human trafficking problem is ridiculous. We're a hotbed for human trafficking along the 401 corridor. So all these factors contribute to a really high rate of usage in our shelters. If you look at the service data, I'm just giving you for the last 8 months, so just to November 30th of this fiscal year. So far, we've served 63 women in shelter, 8 of whom had pets, and they also brought 33 children with them for 126 people going through those 18 dads. We've had resident days of over 4,000, and we've had pet resident days of 488. We have had 8 is about 13% of the women we've supported. So far this year we've brought in 13% of the women we've brought in have had pets. We've had to turn away so far this year 76 women who called for beds when we were at or way over capacity, actually. Just no bed space available. And out of those 76 we turned away, 23 had pets. So we would have had that many more pets in shelter had we been able to finagle bed space. Our journey is what I'd like to share with you in brief today. We don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all program, so we're not saying, hey, everybody, we got the answer, do it like us. We certainly don't have the answer. We have an evolving answer. We don't believe that maybe having women bring their pets into shelter is going to be the answer for everybody. But we do believe through our experience that the positive results that Rochelle talked about are clearly evident. Compared to before when women weren't bringing their pets in, we're seeing a high rate of motivation to work with us as opposed to people who didn't seem to have anything to live for sometimes when they came to us. So our journey started maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I'm a huge animal person, and even before that I was concerned and asking myself, why are we not taking animals in shelter? But I started collecting information about it 5 or 6 years ago, arming myself with information that would enable me to justify sneaking pets into the shelter periodically and flying by the seat of our pants when we had them in shelter. And finally, I just gave my head a shake and said, you know, if it's important enough to do this, it's important enough to do it right. So I went to the board with all my ammunition about the reasons why we should do this, and I got board support to identify Bethesda House as a pet-friendly shelter. course, there was lots of discussion, liability being the primary one. We'll talk about that in a while. Then I went to the staff and talked about this is the way we're going to go. Some were for, some were against. I consulted with our sister shelters and to get their support because it was going to make a difference and have an impact on requests for service, the system that we share amongst our region shelters. I developed a system, or we developed a system, my staff and I, that we believed would best fit our needs, considering both our limitations and our resources. And we came up with a two-pronged approach. We identified and connected with the resources in our region we believed could help us, primarily the animal welfare.
You've frozen up for a little bit, Jackie. Oh, I'm sure you'll be back in a second. Is she frozen for you too, Rochelle?
And I can tell you, I'd say later on in my presentation, I have never heard as we go along.
We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with you, Jackie. It's just slowed down for a second, but you seem to be back.
Okay, okay.
I just wanted to let you know, have you been advancing your slides?
Holy mackerel. No.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Just wanted to flag that and see if you wanted to click those.
Holy mackerel. Sorry, guys.
No problem.
Okay. Introduction. And if you want a copy of this, you can get it and you'll see what I said. Introduction and service data and what we believe and we don't believe, our journey, and we're at operationalizing with due diligence. Basically, are we all on the same page now?
I think so. Looks great. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay. So we identified risk management to reduce liability as being a major priority because that seemed to be on the top of everybody's lists of issues. We decided we needed to develop procedures that needed to consider everybody's needs, the women being admitted to shelter, the animals she brings with her, those around her in shelter, and the women who may not be comfortable coming to a shelter where there are animals. We also have to acknowledge that for some animals, being in shelter isn't necessarily the optimum place. But our argument is it's not permanent and it's better than the alternative for both the women who may not come into shelter without their pets and for the animal whose alternative is often, as Rochelle says, abuse, injury, or death. And then we also need to partner with our community members. So our two-pronged approach is a Pets in Shelter program and a Safe Families, Safe Pets Veteran program. The Pets in Shelter program brings pets into shelter with the women, and I just want to make a note that it isn't just dogs and cats, although it's predominantly dogs and cats. And then we developed a Safe Families, Safe Pets program, providing a safe place for women and animals, either when the shelter is unable to bring the animals in with her for whatever reasons, no beds or just enough space for one person, or when the women would prefer to have her animals temporarily cared for elsewhere while she focused on what she needs to do to move forward from the shelter. Sometimes we heard about women who were so frazzled, having their pets with them may have provided them with calming influence, but it also meant that one other child, furry child, for them to look after, and so that seemed to be the better option for them. So with Pets in Shelter, we developed policies, policies galore, and forms. I'm called the form queen around here, and we've got great forms, I think. The Pets in Shelter program policies really stipulate that no woman will be turned away from the shelter solely because she has pets. Requests are evaluated on a case-by-case basis, considering both the needs of the animals and the women. depending upon a number of variables, we may or may not be able to accommodate a specific animal or woman with her animal in the shelter at the time of the request. This mostly has to do with being at capacity or over capacity already. And the owner must agree to a number of, well, she must agree to a number of rules or regulations or guidelines in order to bring her pet in. First and foremost is an observation period and a wellness check by that, which is usually completed within 12 to 24 hours. And it's usually at no cost to the woman if she can't afford it. Then she has to sign a contract regarding how she'll care for her animals, that she will respect her pets, where they can and can't go in the shelter, that her animals may be asked to leave if they exhibit issues we aren't able to work around. That hasn't happened so far. That she needs to sign a form releasing the agency of liability if anything happens to her animal while in the shelter. And this is a tricky one. She needs to sign over the right to the animal to the shelter in the event that she leaves and doesn't return, and doesn't take her pet with her. That's one of the big things that people seem to raise all the time. What happens if you get left with the pet? And she also needs to sign that she understands she and her animal will be asked to leave if she breaches the contract. Our community partners are our sister shelters. We developed a prearranged protocol. When they get requests for service from women with pets, they refer them to us. We refer them, people who don't want to come to a pet-friendly shelter, we refer them back to our sister shelters, and we also help them get there. So it is a cycle that we work together on, and it works really well. We have 2 veterinary clinics who provide wellness checks and provide any immediate attention required. And as I said, the costs are covered by the woman herself if she can afford it. Otherwise, the vet clinics, often through the Farley Foundation, will cover the costs. Local churches are willing to provide payment for that, or we pay for it out of our donations. We have local animal groomers because sometimes pets come to us in pretty bad condition, depending upon, sometimes the woman hasn't even been able to care for herself or her children, let alone her pets, and groomers will provide bathing and grooming and nail cutting, etc. Local pet stores provide us with food and supplies when we ask, and the local animal rescue organizations, or the local pound, for lack of a better word, also help us with supplies and our backup in the case of abandoned animals. Our Safe Families, Safe Pets program is a collaboration between Bethesda House and Horizon House in Ajax to provide temporary care for pets of women who need to enter the shelters when we can't bring them into the shelter. Care is provided by temporary care providers in their personal homes. We screen the temporary care providers. We've developed a committee to do that. They do home visits, criminal reference checks are submitted, they do references, etc. The animals are matched with appropriate temporary care providers. Both the owners and the temporary care providers sign waivers of liability. The temporary care providers are required to sign an agreement that care for the animals will be provided in line with our Animal Rights Code of Care. The owners and the temporary care providers' identities are kept confidential, although they keep in touch by telephone using first names. And those calls are initiated by shelter staff when the shelter resident wants to connect, so that there's no numbers showing up on phones. And the owners sign over the rights to the animal to the shelter in the event they abandon the animal. So that's the same criteria there is in the shelter program. Back to the Pets in Shelter program, we had a transition period, of course. Staff that were hired before the decision to become pet-friendly was made, and the clients in the shelter when the transition formally began. As I said, some were on board, others were equally adamant against the decision. We worked with them regarding their individual concerns. Temporary measures were put in place to support them. Allergies, we required doctor's notes to specify what types of allergies and the degree, and we would pay for the doctor's notes, etc., so that we knew how far we needed to take, whether it was a mask when they were on shift or whatever. And their fear of animals, we identified areas in the shelter that the animals wouldn't be, and we didn't make room checks in rooms where animals are located. Part of the job of a woman, a staff who had a fear of animals. I can tell you that it was minimal. Everybody talks about fear of animals and allergies, and we had all these things in place and nothing happened. Once the transition period began, in the staff hiring process, we identified that animals on site are a working condition. And when you work with us, you are agreeing to work in a shelter where there are animals. And that's written right into the job agreement. And clients, all women are notified right up front that there will be animals in shelter. It's built into the prices call sheets and the intake forms. If the woman is okay with that, she signs an acknowledgement upon intake that it's okay with her, and whether or not she is willing to room with a woman who has an animal with her. And if the preference is to go to a pet-free shelter, then we help them connect with one of the sister shelters and help get them there if needed. There was definitely resistance to having pets in shelter from, I call them disbelievers. And our recommendation is to reframe. We say that naysayers providing us with reasons why we can't do this are being positive by providing us with areas where we get to demonstrate our creativity. Our mantra is definitely, it's our job to reduce barriers to women accessing service. We are saving lives, and we remind ourselves constantly we're saving animals from abuse and death as well. We've heard all the arguments over the past 3 years since we became a pet-friendly shelter. You know, the staff with allergies thing disappeared after the transition period. Residents with allergies likewise. Fleas and bugs during the wellness checks, we get those dealt with. Property damage, we had one dog who didn't like being in the bedroom when his owner wasn't there, and he managed to try to chew through the door. But you know what? We've had children, non-furry family members do more damage than that. So I see it as just a cost of doing business. Cleanliness in the shelter, people were concerned, you know, is the public health going to allow you to do this? The public health has no problem as long as we meet their cleanliness, you know, criteria. It hasn't impacted the cleanliness of the shelter. There are areas that the animals can't go, the kitchen area or the playroom. There are spaces they can go, and we just keep them clean. Lack of space, I'll talk about that in a minute, in a different aspect. People talked about potentially aggressive animals or animal bites. During the isolation period before the wellness check, we get to meet the animals. We go through a thorough information sheet about the animal with the owner. They could lie. They could tell us, no, you know, he's never bitten anyone. But I can say in 3 years, pets have responded very well to being in here, and I know that there, you know, may be something looming on the horizon at any point in time, but that's part of doing due diligence. You reduce the risks as much as you possibly can, and you acknowledge the benefits outweigh the risks. External regulations, we come to us none that prohibit us from having animals in shelter. I'll let you read through the staff comments yourself after. Basically, they our survey replicates Rochelle's information, women delaying coming in, animals being abused in the home. Just really incredibly sad stories, and the acknowledgement from the women that they're allowed to bring their pets in has been so gratifying. Challenges, there's ongoing challenges. At times, pets can be disruptive to other clients and staff. Kitty litter can smell, a dog can bark, a bird can chirp. We problem solve on a case-by-case basis. You know, for example, if the kitty litter is really smelling and this cat food is smelling, we change to a dry food and it reduces the smell, you know, from that. Providing animals with toys, making sure they get outdoor time, having other clients accept that they need to accept normal animal behavior, because you know, if they had wanted to come in with an animal, we would respect that as well. And they've already signed in to coming into a shelter that has animals, and 100% of them have accepted that. Sometimes it's a challenge ensuring the pets are well cared for. Just as with children, there are different animal care ideas from owner to owner, and we want to make sure that animals' welfare is looked after. So if we find out that perhaps something isn't happening well with the animal, we contract with the woman just as we would about anything else, and go from there. One of the questions is, how long is too long for a woman to leave her dog in the bedroom? Because women have other things to do, and while they're there, the bed, they can't be in the common areas alone. The animals can't be, so they stay in the bedroom. We encourage women to set up pet care arrangements with other residents, the same way as they would make child care arrangements. We're in process of a student and volunteer dog walker program, and increasing access to more areas in the house. We started off cautiously, and it worked more and more openly, and we're dealing with that. And as I said, the dogs are better off for a couple of hours in the bedroom than they are being left at home for 24 hours. When a woman has a physical disability who exercises the dogs or cleans the litter box, etc., currently staff and other residents volunteer to help out. And again, we're in process with astute and volunteer dog walkers and animal care helpers. And if we need to do a safety transfer or send the residents to a crisis bed, perhaps at a mental health facility or whatever, and they can't take the animal with them, we offer temporary care through the Safe Family, Safe Pet Durham program. If it's going to be a short term, one of the other residents could take responsibility. Actually, those are the two things we've used so far. Our recommendations, our solutions are not perfect, and in some cases they're a work in progress. It's based on the resources we have around us. We understand not every shelter will have access to the resources we have, for example, multiple sister shelters. And we will just have to, we recommend that they build their shelter around whatever resources you can come up with. We suggest reframing. We focus on what we can do to make it work, rather than all the reasons people say it won't work. I started off by saying we have to have service and empathy animals, support animals, I can't remember the phrase right now, in shelter if required. If we can make it work for them, then why can't we make it work for other animals as well? Definitely bring in your community partners, identify who you need, who can provide it. Bring in whatever shelters are around you as supporters, and just get started. Whoop. That's it. That's me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just muted myself for a second, just to make it a little quieter while you were presenting. So thank you so much. That was fantastic. I see some questions popping up, so we'll get right to it. I would like to end at 1 o'clock Eastern so that people can carry on with their schedule. So the first question that I have that is related to your presentation is, are you unionized? And did that create any barriers to requiring staff to be okay with working in a shelter where pets may be in residence? So that would be a question for Jackie, but people can feel free to write in answers to Rochelle too.
Yeah, yes, we are unionized. Employers have the right to put into place conditions of employment in order to meet their mandates and do business as needed. So we simply moved ahead and followed our collective agreement. There was nothing in it that precluded that employer right or management right. So we've had no problems. Anything else?
Excellent. Yeah. I'm typing in some answers that are generic. People are asking if it's possible to get a copy of these handouts. They are attached as handouts to this presentation, so everyone should automatically get one who's registered here. But I see some other questions that I think I'll read out. Okay, so there's the union one. There's a question about whether Jackie's open to sharing policies and procedures about this. That one's from Kia Rainbow from Interval House of Ottawa, who is starting a pet program launching her pet program in the spring.
Hi, Kia. Yes, definitely. I'm more than open to sharing whatever we have. As I said, it may not be what you would do in your own shelter, but anything that you can get out of them, I'm more than willing to share. Just connect with me by email.
Okay. How did you decide between animal housing areas or animals in the bedrooms? That's also from Kia.
Okay, the main priority is safety. Again, we want to mitigate risk. Where there may be children playing, or where there's people congregated around stoves, for hygiene purposes, of course, in the kitchen. So what we did is we took a look. There's long hallways and stairwells and areas in the shelter that people don't congregate as much, but you can be there and you can have your animals with you, and you know, a communal, you know, sitting area or whatever. So this is what I was saying, that sometimes space is an argument. Well, you know, do you really want your animal to be in such a small space? It isn't really small, but they see it as limited because there are areas like the playrooms, etc. They can't go in. But in actual fact, the animals thrive as long as they're getting the attention from their owners. There's adequate outside resources, parks, etc., for walking and being around, and it's better than the alternative. It's not permanent, and we've seen animals blossom. One of the examples of the animal who got out of the abuse with the owner was he came totally fragile and vulnerable, and he developed his strength along with his owner. And the staff, one of the quotes in my presentation is about how the staff noticed that the animal benefited as much from the peace and tranquility, even though it's hectic and hell on wheels some days in shelter. The animal getting away from the abuse benefited it as well.
There's another question. There's a number of questions that have been popping up. There's one from Teresa McKinnon that asks whether you've needed to add dog bites to your insurance.
No.
Okay.
Insurance didn't require anything different.
Okay. You sort of answered this in your previous question. Karen Mason is asking whether you have an outdoor space or kennel.
No kennel. We have the women take the animals into the outdoor smoking area. There's a little bit of a smoking hut type thing, picnic benches and stuff, and trees, and it's just basically a backyard. And the animals can go in the backyard as long as the dogs and any other four-legged creature can go out on a leash and be let loose if there's no children in the area as well. And there's parks, and they take them for walks in the town.
Okay, so there's quite a few questions. We may not be able to get to all of them. Do you have a limit on the size of pet? I'm going to combine some together. Do you have a limit on the size of the pet? Do you accept certain pets like pit bulls? And in terms of like registration and licensing, what was the role of the ministry in getting behind this program?
I'll start with the last one. Our program ministry, our program supervisor from the ministry, Leanne Peru, is 100% behind us. We call this our way of reducing barriers to access to service, and that's one of the things that we are expected to do by the ministry.
Yeah. And when we say ministry, I mean, of course, the Ontario Ministry of what's it, Community?
Community and Social Services.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we'll have participants from all over Canada here.
Okay, Ministry of Community and Social Services. Our primary funder. Size of animals? No, it just makes a difference whether or not we put another animal or another woman in the room with the animals. We had somebody who had 2 Bernese mountain dogs that unfortunately we couldn't bring in simply because we had no space for the owner even at that point in time. That would have been interesting. But we did have a woman who brought 3 rescue dogs who were all medium to large dogs. She'd been living in her car since she fled abuse and called one of the other shelters, and they said, well, we can't help you, but call Bethesda House. And we brought her in that night with her dogs, and she slept in the observation room, which is a large accessible washroom on the main floor that we use as the observation room. And they had the wellness checks done, and they went up to their bedroom, and 3 dogs, it was no problem.
That's great. All right, so we're at 1 o'clock now. I can ask whether either of you are able to stay for another 2 or 3 minutes just to try to wrap up the last few questions. I think they're mostly for Jackie, but if anyone, Rochelle is great, and if anyone has any questions about the academic side or that research, it does provide great evidence. And I know that anyone, I'm sure, Jackie, did you use APARG's research when you were applying for your funding and getting things like that?
Oh, I haven't applied for any funding. There's no funding attached to our programs.
Oh.
But no, we do it within the shelter budget. It doesn't really cost us much at all. But I did use, I suspect, all the American research that was available 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago when I started investigating the human-animal bond stuff that I took to present to my board. So Rochelle, the types of information that you provide is what people should use when going to your boards and getting support to make this change. We're not asking for permission to make an operational change because boards are to be governance, not operations, but you do need the support of your board because it is going to be a controversial thing. And Rochelle, your information is the type of information, only I had to use American data at that point in time to show the board why it was important to do this.
And we do have a number of publications out. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Canadian data, I would have definitely used Canadian data.
Yeah. And we do have a number of publications that have been released that I'm happy to circulate, as well as if you have questions or comments or are looking for support or research to help support you in terms of going to your boards, please let me know and reach out to APARG. We'd be more than happy to help.
Yeah. While we wrap up these last few questions, I'm just going to launch one last little poll just to give us a sense of what range we've reached across Canada. Unfortunately, it only allowed 5 options, so I had to scrunch BC and the territories together. I know that's not ideal, I apologize. Now we've got a few more questions. So if, does the woman buy her own food for the pet? And do you have an opinion on, oops, sorry, I have to scroll down here. Do you have an opinion on having a house pet within the shelter versus women bringing in their own pets? So some shelters will have therapy pets or support pets that belong to the shelter and stay there for mental health support for the women. So those, I'll just combine those two together for now.
Okay, regarding food, if the woman can afford to feed her pet, we always ask, what would you have done if you didn't come in the shelter? You know, did you have financial resources now? Do you have financial resources now? If they can, they do. If they can't, then we go to our donors, our pet food stores and our rescue group to get donated supplies, or we use our donations or go to our local churches to have them buy it. So no woman who can't afford it is going to be put in the position that she has to do that. We'll help her through the period she's in shelter, and we'll get her started off well as we can when she leaves. In terms of, what was the second one?
Having a shelter, a pet that sort of belongs to the shelter, that's a therapy pet or house shelter pet, versus the women bringing in their own pets.
I've worked in. Thoughts on that? I've worked in. I believe it serves two different purposes. The one of having women bring their own pets in is for the safety, wealth, and welfare of the woman and the pet that you're bringing in. But in terms of shelter animals, I've worked in shelter services through different ministries, residential programs for many years, and we've always had rabbits or cats or a house animal, and I'm 100% for the benefits of therapy animals, but I think it's two different topics. It's you're benefiting in two different ways.
Okay, and I see two more questions here, and some thank yous from people who had to go. So what do you do? Has this ever happened, and what do you do if a woman does abandon her pet at the shelter? And then how do people become involved as volunteers for walking dogs, for example?
We've never had an animal abandoned in 3 years. We've averaged about 12 women a year coming in with animals for significant numbers of pet days, resident days. No one has ever abandoned them, but our process would be to connect with the animal rescues that we've already connected with, and the pounds. The pounds sometimes have very strict limits on what animals they can take. If they're safe, they don't want to take them, and of course, when they're with us, they're safe. But the animal rescues will take them, and some pounds will take them based on the sign-over that the woman had already left with us. Was there another question there?
Yeah, how do people become volunteers? How do people get involved to become walkers or to support the women and their pets?
We have a big volunteer program. We have, well, I think it's big anyway. We have about 60 volunteers, and we get students on placement, students doing their co-op hours during high school, and we're heavy into promoting student placements and volunteers with us. So just through the normal process, we put out the word on Facebook, and well, actually we haven't had to do that, but we would if we didn't have people, and we're going to as we get more need. But that's a work in process. It's just through your normal volunteer lines. You'd be surprised how many people will jump to help with animals.
Great. Well, we still have, we went up to 48 maximum. We're still at 38, which I always think is a good sign if people are willing to stay and keep listening, even if we go a little bit longer with the questions. So I prefer doing that when I can rather than cutting people off. But I really want to have some time to thank Rochelle and Jackie for sharing their time, sharing their knowledge and experiences with us, and for being here in the community of women's shelters and research and just being part of this sort of network of connecting and web of knowledge sharing that I think will really help to open up more possibilities for women who are seeking safety. So thank you to both of you, and I'm really excited to have you part of this webinar series. It's part of the Open Doors webinar series. Open Doors project is a project of actually YWCA Canada that Women's Shelters Canada partners with, that is seeking to offer lower barrier models for women with mental health or substance use concerns who are fleeing violent situations. And in those web workshops, this has come up again and again, the importance of pets for mental health and how much having that option to have a pet with them has really helped women who are going through a really hard time, and how it helps them to settle in and to feel better. So I'm really excited to finally have been able to offer this workshop and to have such fantastic speakers. So thank you so much to both of you. This video will be available in an archive on our YouTube stream and on opendoorsproject.ca. So please feel free to share it with people in your network later on, and the link will be provided to you automatically in the next few hours. So thank you so much.